I'm not saying that like size is everything, but like 1.6 million people showed up to see Madonna 40 years into her career. Like that's a pretty big deal.
Hello, my LGBT cuties, and welcome back to another episode of A Jaded Gay. I'm Rob Lovelace, and today I am a jaded gay because it's election day, and I'm hanging in there.
I'm fine.
In all seriousness, though, obviously there's a lot of anxiety around this. Just a reminder, get out and vote today. I don't want this to be a political episode. I think it is important that we find some lighter things to talk about in the current state of things. So that's why I thought it would be fun to do a gay icons episode, because it's been a little while since we did one. So just a reminder, get out to vote. And then as soon as you're done with that, you can disassociate from the election stress for the rest of the day by escaping into the music as we talk about none other than the Queen of Pop herself. And I am super excited to have a very special guest joining us today to talk all about Madonna. But before we get into it, let's pull the tarot card. Ooh, so today we drew a major arcana card, and that is the Emperor in reverse. Just a reminder that major arcana cards signify something big, like a significant milestone. So the Emperor is the fourth card in the major arcana, and in numerology, 4 is tied to structure and stability. The Emperor embodies the divine masculine energy, so it's very action-oriented. In traditional depictions of this card, there are a lot of reds and oranges from his robe to the colors in the background, and these colors are symbolic of his power, authority, and assertiveness. But when we draw this card in reverse, it can signify a few things, such as an abuse of power, the presence of toxic masculine energy, or an unequal partnership. Overall, though, when we draw the Emperor in reverse, it's a sign that we need to make sure we're connecting our personal power to our ability to take action. This card radiates masculine energy, so we need to let that energy flow so that we can stand up for ourselves and take bold action to move forward. And remember, the Emperor is viewed as a leader, so we should feel empowered to break free of typical confines and structure to take action that feels in alignment with our goals. And with that in mind, let's get into the episode. I am very excited to introduce today's guest. He is a photographer and host of the MLVC podcast, the Madonna Podcast. Get ready to get into the groove. Please welcome Stefan Mreczko. Hi, Stefan. How are you today?
I'm fantastic. How are you?
Doing well. Thank you for joining us. I'm very excited to have another Gay Icon series here. I did a few last year, but this is the first main one that we're doing for 2024, right towards the end of the year. I think it's very fitting to bring you on as a special guest because we have a lot to cover with the Queen of Pop herself, Madonna.
Madonna.
Yes, the prototype for many of our modern day pop stars here.
For sure.
So I'm so excited for you to bring all your expertise and Madonna stand-up to us. But before we get too into it, can you introduce yourself, tell the listeners a little bit about you, who you are, what you do, your pronouns, all that fun stuff?
Sure. Stefan, he, him. I am a newly rejoined resident of Philadelphia. I had spent a couple decades in New York City, and it just got too damn expensive. So I'm now back in Philadelphia, which is hometown. And yeah, I, work a full-time job in marketing and communications and PR. And as a side hustle, I do photography as well as host a Madonna podcast. So that's me in a nutshell.
And today, are you a jaded or non-jaded gay, and why?
I'm totally jaded. Yeah, totally jaded. Only because I think... I don't know how your experience is in Philadelphia, but it's just very difficult to meet single available gay men of my age. And most of them are married and or in their early 20s. And that's sort of not the demographic that I'm looking for. But yeah, I know I'm trying not to be so jaded, but I think I've just been, I'm super jaded.
I get it. And I'm not sure how many listeners are Philly based here, but I'll include your Instagram and the information in the show notes afterwards. So maybe there will be some out there that can slide into your DMs following the show.
Yeah.
You heard it here first. Hit Stefan up.
We can have a soft pretzel and a cheesesteak and walk South Street. Yeah, it'll be fun.
Well, hopefully we can ease some of the jadedness today by talking about I'll say the queen of pop, Madonna. So I'm going to just start off with a really loaded question here. Who is Madonna?
So, I mean, my answer would be the queen of pop, but we've already sort of established that. And I think a lot of people would argue that she's not the queen of pop, and those people are incorrect because they've not done their homework. I get it. People who don't view her as the queen of pop are people who didn't grow up with her. If you're looking at her now, she's 65. She's old compared, for people in their teens and early 20s. And I think as generations go on, it changes, like who you love and who you look up to. And, the people in their teens and early 20s, they're looking at people like, Chappell Roan or Charlie XCX, there's a new crop that come up every generation. But they wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Madonna and the path that she blazed. So, yeah, that's who she is in short. Obviously, she's a musician, a singer, performer, actor. She's done everything in the entertainment industry. She's a blueprint for what it means to be a pop star. That's in short. She's everywhere. If you don't know, I always think it's weird when people don't know who she is, because I'm like, how? Like, she's one of those last remaining icons from the 80s. And it's just, I get it. The 80s was 40 years ago. So for me, it's like, oh yeah, that was just a couple days, but that wasn't too long ago. But yeah, it's a long time ago. So, but it's weird that people, because people know who Michael Jackson is, like they know him off the top of their head, or Whitney Houston, and I guess maybe it's like, they're more well known now because they're gone and people look back and remember them with fondness, whereas Madonna's still going. And I think people, because she's still going, they don't sort of appreciate her as much. And she's said that as well. She's like, they're going to love me when I'm gone. And I'm like, agreed, like once she's, and hopefully we have her for many a year still. But one inevitable day when she's no longer with us, they'll worship her.
I think you summed it up nicely there. Obviously, you have a full podcast series dedicated to everything Madonna, because you can go on for years talking about everything she's done to contribute to pop culture.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's an awesome just summary of her. So with that all in mind, what is your earliest memory of Madonna?
So I know this is when I became a Madonna fan. It was the first time she came onto my radar. There was an elementary school birthday party that I think it was 5th grade, and the parents wanted to prevent us from doing a kissing party because that was like all the rage, like Spin the Bottle or like 7 Minutes in Heaven. And like we had started doing that at that age. And so word got around to the parents of whatever the next party was. So they chaperoned the party and put as entertainment to prevent us from going into the closet and making out with each other. They put on the Betamax version of Madonna's Virgin Tour. So it had just come out on Betamax and I think VHS, and they had a Betamax player, which is so funny to think of. But that was our entertainment. And the show starts and Madonna comes down the stairs and starts singing Dress You Up. And I was on board ever since. I don't know what it was about that moment, but she was so dynamic and fascinating, I think, at that time. And as a closeted gay kid, even to myself at that time, I don't think I recognized what it was that was resonating to me. But I think she was so confident and just energized, and singing and dancing and having fun and beautiful. Just this angelic face. So yeah, that's my earliest memory of Madonna.
And would you say, was that what made you a fan right away, or did it take a little bit longer of her career for you to become a fan of hers?
Nope. Right then and there. Yeah, right then. And I think I mean, lucky me, it was like a couple of years after she had already come out. So I was able to do it's the only time in my life I've ever been able to like binge Madonna music that was like in the past. Otherwise, like I think from 1987 on, I was like caught up to speed. Like, it's like when you find a really great show on Netflix and you're like, oh my God, there's 3 seasons. And then you get to binge all 3 seasons. And then you're like, oh no, now I have to wait until the 4th season comes out and you have to wait like everybody else. That was sort of like once Virgin Tour came out, I think it was around the same time that like the Papa Don't Preach, True Blue, Who's That Girl era had sort of started. And so I was able to get all of her like first 3 albums and like listen to them back to back to back. But yeah, that's when I became a fan and I never looked back.
So with that in mind, can you give us an overview of her career?
I mean, it started, she started as a singer. She started doing movies. She became a mother, and she's still performing. This is a terrible overview of her career. Yeah, I mean, she's, like she's a singer. She's a dancer. She dabbled in movies. Some were successful and some were not. She's, an amazing stage performer. And what else has she done? I mean, she's written children's books. She's been on Broadway. She's, every facet of, I think she's known as the most photographed woman in the world. Like her career it's astounding, like you can't sort of sum it up in one simple thing, like to be like, oh yeah, she's a pop star, because I think it's more than that. I mean, she's an activist, she's been, her philanthropy is amazing. She's, that's a terrible overview of her career, but I mean, you'd think I'd have like an elevator speech prepared. I don't.
Levántate y ponte a limpiar. The Latin Minute is your new favorite bilingual comedy podcast where 2 Latinos living in Southwest Florida serve up some spicy takes on the hottest celebrities, gossip, juicy chisme, and just a sprinkle of politics. With humor, culture, and plenty of laughs, this podcast brings the best of both worlds. So make sure to check out the Latin Minute. You can follow us on Apple Podcasts, iHeart, and Spotify. Also, visit our Facebook page, The Latin Minute. We'll see you there.
Well, to your point too, you can't just kind of write her off as a pop star or an activist. She's all these things, like a total cultural icon, because if you watch any movie or TV show, whether it's the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, there's some Madonna song or some Madonna reference in there. She's just kind of transcended time and been a staple within pop culture.
There you go. Thank you. That's perfect.
With that in mind, as we were talking about her being a cultural icon, there has also been a lot of controversy throughout her career. So can you tell us about some of her cultural provocations?
Yeah, well, I think that's sort of what she became known for over time was becoming controversial in terms of doing things that didn't make people happy, or it sort of rubbed up against what puritanical people or sort of like prudes were like, oh no, why is she doing that? I think the first controversy was when they had the very first MTV VMA Awards, and she came out on a huge wedding cake in a bridal gown and started writhing around on the floor. I mean, she was humping her veil and her dress was riding up, and you could see her underwear. And like, it's so funny to think that in the early 80s when she did that was so shocking, that people were like up in arms about that, because like, if you look at today's standards for what's acceptable on, I mean, the performances that we get today, it's like, wow, Madonna is nothing compared to that. But obviously, as time goes on, like, if you didn't have her rolling around on the stage in 1984, then you never would have gotten to like WAP, in the music industry. Like, it's funny to think of where we've come. But and then, I mean, there were scandals such as Papa Don't Preach, when she released that song and video, I mean, that was her saying, it was about women's choice and her saying that I'm keeping this baby that I'm pregnant with in this song. And that was, oh my God, people were outraged. Was she telling, the youth of America, it's okay to have premarital sex and to get pregnant as a high school kid. And I think, Madonna's message wasn't one of, go have, unprotected sex and get pregnant as a teenager. It was more of let's give women the option to, have a choice to do what they want with their bodies. I mean, obviously things went off the rails once you got to her Like a Prayer video. That video just blew up because, Baptist Christians were upset because she's, kissing a black Jesus. People were incensed by the fact that she's dancing in front of lit crosses. There were so many visuals that were pissing people off. But I remember MTV had done a news segment about that, and they showed some woman from a church, and she's like, as Christians, there are so many other things going on in the world that we should be worried about. And I was like, yeah, exactly. Like, look at it in terms of, and again, I was like, the fact that people were pissed that Madonna was kissing a black man, like, really? In 1989? Like, why? It's kind of bizarre. And then I think it was her 1-2 punch of the Justify My Love video, and then her whole erotica album / sex book era. She was pushing sex down the throats of Americans, and America is notoriously prudish compared to other countries. And I just don't think people were ready for that. But it's kind of ballsy for her to do that and showcase fantasies and other ways of life that aren't just men and women. And, I always loved that when she did an interview with Nightline when the Justify My Love video came out, and Nightline aired it. And then they had this wonderful interview, which is online if you Google it on YouTube. But she's so smart and she's so eloquent about how she talks about it. And she references the fact that, no man was making her do any of this. This was her choice. She put herself in all of these situations. And, like when she's talking about her Express Yourself video, she's like, I crawled under my own table. I put that, dog collar around my own neck, and she's like, no man was forcing me to do that. And I thought that was like, wow, how ballsy and strong of her. And if you look at the sex book, like, no artist today, you would never see someone like Ariana Grande or Charlie XCX or I'm trying to think of Chappell Roan, maybe, who knows, maybe, but like you'd never see them get fully naked and do a whole like pictorial book and publish it. And it's like it's funny to think that she was as brazen as she was. I remember when it happened, I was like, what is she doing? Oh my God, what is this? Because it was the first time you'd ever seen anyone do something like that. And I think, she was 1990 Madonna was like peak Madonna. And then she does Justify My Love and then erotica. And it was like, you sort of were like, she's fallen off the rails. Like it's over. Like her career's over. And then she just kept going. And you realized like, oh, it wasn't that big of a deal after all. But yeah, she's definitely been known to have her share of controversy, it's been fun and then not as well, because, when you're a Madonna fan, people come to you when she does crazy things like that. And suddenly it's a reflection on you as a person. Oh, you mean you support her doing this sex book? You support her doing this erotica video? And you kind of have to suddenly defend people or defend her and defend yourself as to like, why do you like her? Why do you like this? This isn't normal. It's that type of thing. So I think you get used to, as a Madonna fan, from a very early age, I got having used to like, I didn't understand why people were so upset about things, because in my mind, Madonna was doing it. So it was cool. Like she's not hurting anybody. Hey, if she wants to have, a makeout session with a woman while her boyfriend watches in the Justify My Love video? Sure. Go ahead, Madonna. I don't care. But yeah.
To your point too, I think one thing with Madonna, especially early on, well, backtrack a little bit. I think in the music industry, there's a double standard where, men can be these sexual beings and stuff, but it's always shameful if they're too open about their sexuality. Yeah. And Madonna was somebody who, like you said, with the Papa Don't Preach video and song, she really owned the autonomy of her body, but then she also really owned her own sexuality. She wasn't repressing it. She wasn't afraid to hide her sexuality. And so the 80s was definitely a more conservative time. We had the Reagan administration and then going into the 90s, the Bush administration. So there was that era of conservatism. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Conservatism. And then on top of that, there's Madonna coming out who, there weren't a lot of women maybe as sexually forward in the music industry. While it was somewhat okay for men, it wasn't viewed that way for women. So she really kind of took ownership of that. I was curious too, because you did mention some of her controversies around religion and some of the iconography. I know there was a lot of controversy over her name, like her name itself, Madonna, because obviously if you look into religion, there's Madonna and Child, the, Immaculate Conception, all of that. So how did she come up with the name Madonna?
Oh, well, that's her birth name. Her mom's name was Madonna by birth. And when Madonna was born, that's what they named her. So she's sort of like Madonna Jr., but not. But yeah, that's her birth name. It's not like she decided, it's not like her name's Julie and she decided as a stage name, I'm going to call myself Madonna. That's been, and she's said that in early interviews, she's like, what else was I going to do for a living with a name like this? Like she's not going to be a supermarket checker,
Interesting. Okay. I always thought Madonna might have just been a stage name. Truthfully, I didn't really know too much about her biography beyond her career. So that's really interesting.
Yeah. Madonna Louise Veronica Ciccone. That's her full name.
Okay. Nice. Well, going off of that, she's also, as you touched upon, she's been in the public for decades now, and she's continuously reinvented herself. So how have these transformations played a part in her career?
So I think that was one of those things. I mean, again, growing up with her as an artist, whenever she would shift and change her look, it just became a thing that she did, like you just sort of expected it after a while, like, oh, here's a new Madonna album. What's the look going to be? And it wasn't necessarily just the look, her hair, her makeup, her outfits. It was also like the sound of her albums. They would shift drastically over time to sound different from one thing to the next. And I think that, people called her chameleon or the queen of reinvention. And I think it was mostly, she didn't want to be the same thing over and over and over again. She was exploring different facets of herself, like not following trends, but she's friends with artists and friends with fashion designers. And so when they would be creating new lines, she would be getting inspiration from them, or she'd be like in the clubs or, friends with artists who were exposing her to different things. And so she'd be presenting that in her work. And so I think the reinvention it wasn't a calculated thing. It was just something that, I'm interested in wearing this kind of thing now, or I'm interested in having blonde hair now as opposed to, or red hair or short hair or long hair, it was just, she's just playing. She's using her body as a canvas for her art, if you will. And I think it sort of trickled down. It wasn't just what she wore, but it's like how the music sounded. Who was she working with? Who were the people that she was collaborating with? Were they, it sort of just was all encompassing.
And it's funny too, because as you're talking about some of her different looks there, I can already kind of relate to the iconography of that, because you're saying red hair and I'm thinking Confessions on the Dance Floor, that purple leotard she's wearing and dancing in heels in front of the mirror and all that. And the black hair, I'm thinking of the Frozen music video.
Yeah.
So it's, it's as simple as a hair color, like you said, but it really ties to an era and a look. And I think it's interesting with Madonna. I like to look at pop stars' different eras. And I think there's some artists out there like Rihanna back in the day when she still released music. It's been almost 10 years without an album now.
That's crazy.
But if you look at her early career, it was like every year there was a new album. Like it wasn't like the whole 2 to 3 year era. It was like, here's an album, but those eras still felt so distinct. You can see the looks with them. And it's the same with Madonna. She released a lot of music pretty quickly back to back throughout the 80s and 90s and even into the 2000s. And each of those has such a distinct look and sound that even though it was rapid succession, they really are their own eras.
Well, and I mean, just the whole idea of eras, I mean, she sort of started that, whether it be intentional or not. I mean, the reason why we look at something like an era in terms of pop music and like the album rollout and the look and how the videos are and the sound and whatnot, that's from her. Like she started doing that after like a Virgin, the album, when she came out for Live to Tell off of the True Blue album. I mean, she had blonde, long flowing hair and people were like, what? She's dressed up, it was a very demure dress. And then she chopped off all her hair and it was this short blonde. And, obviously we've gotten that iconic album cover to the True Blue album, beautifully photographed by Herb Ritts. And it's a whole different look. And, and then you get to Like a Prayer and she's got dark hair and it's long, and then Express Yourself, it's short and a bob. And like, it's just constantly changing. But before then, before she started doing that type of stuff, pop stars wanted to sort of cement who they were with one specific look, one specific sound, because they wanted people to know, this is what I like. I like this look. I like this sound, because they were afraid if they changed, people wouldn't know who they were and they'd lose fans. And I thought, how smart of Madonna to sort of like, expect us to be smart enough to know, yep, this is her, and stay along for the ride,
Definitely. And when you're talking through that, I can definitely see what you're saying, how there were a lot of artists who had a similar sound, and that's why you see them kind of fade away a little bit. Like Donna Summer had a really big sound in the late 70s. It transcended a little bit into the 80s, but with disco dying, she kind of faded a little bit too. I think one of the other big pop stars who did do that a bit, and this might be controversial because I believe that there's a feud between the two of them, but I think Cher was somebody else too around that time who also reinvented herself, going from kind of some folky to rock to in the 90s pop and all that. But I believe, isn't there a little bit of
I don't know they were together for that Women's March a couple years back. I often wonder if it's just media invented, like I think they tend to be snarky about each other from time to time, but I think maybe it's just for like media mentions, they might be in on the joke, like Madonna, I'm gonna slag you off in the press, and Madonna's like, sure, go ahead, I don't care, like I don't think that matters to them because it gets mentions and it keeps their name in the press and it's funny.
Yeah, definitely. It's like the Britney Christina, like who knows how much of an actual feud was there, but the media definitely like to pick up on it. But I was just curious because I know Cher's somebody who's also credited with a lot of reinventions too, but I wasn't sure if that was like blasphemy bringing it up here.
No. But I think you're right with, I think that's been one of Madonna's great successes is adapting with time. Had she stayed the same sound from the 80s, she wouldn't be as big or as relevant today as, I think it was the fact that she shifted her sound and the fact that she shifted her look. It created a whole new engagement for old, current fans, and then brought on new fans because she was, I like this new sound. And then they could, like if they hadn't heard Madonna before, suddenly now it's like, what's this new song? Like people always say like Ray of Light was like, a reinvention for her. And then Confessions on a Dance Floor was another reinvention for her. Like sometimes it was really successful, like those albums. And then, after Confessions on a Dance Floor, you had her Hard Candy album where she sort of like really leaned heavy into R&B. And it just didn't work as well. Like people were like, no, this is Nelly Furtado from 3 years ago. Like it doesn't sound fresh and new. And so sometimes it's successful and sometimes it's not,
And it's interesting too, because talking through discography like that, if you look at her number ones and her biggest hits, like they all sound so different from each other. Like even looking chronologically, obviously Vogue was number one. That's such an iconic sound. But then you jump to Frozen, which is also number one. It's not dancey at all. It's very almost spiritually in a way. It's darker sounding, very moody. So there are these commercially successful songs, but each one sounds so different from each other. And like you said, I think that's how she keeps her success going.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
So with that in mind, we've talked about some of her songs, but can you tell us a little bit more about her discography and some of the records she set as an artist?
I mean, so like I had mentioned, she's been around for 40 plus years. She started putting music out. Her very first single was Everybody in 1982. And I mean, she's been putting music out, progressively since then. I mean, we're now in the longest drought from a Madonna album. We haven't gotten a new Madonna album since 2019. So this is the longest time frame since, in her entire career that we have gone without. It's never been this long of a time. So we're hoping that she eventually comes out with a new album sooner or later. But I did look up some stats. I try not to look at stats as like a measure of how successful they are. I mean, yes, Madonna has had commercial success, but for me as a fan, it's mostly been like, how does she make me feel? How does what does her art do for me? And I mean, there are songs that I listen to over and over and over again. I mean, I'm always listening to Madonna music, always. It's mood dependent, but I think that to me is like how she's been successful for me, is that I will still listen to her music even after I've been listening to songs since the 80s. Like it's crazy to think that some of the songs have been with me for that long and that I still find them interesting to listen to. But she does hold the title of best-selling female recording artist of all time. I believe she still holds that record. I don't think Taylor Swift has gotten her yet.
Get a good lawyer.
Only because music has changed, like in terms of, people used to have to buy physical albums, and now it's such a streaming industry, where people don't buy physical music anymore. I mean, vinyl obviously has had a resurgence in terms of popularity, but I think she's still the best-selling female recording artist of all time. I know that her True Blue album was the best-selling album of 1986, and she was the best-selling female artist of the 1980s. Her Immaculate Collection album, which was her very first greatest hits collection in 1990, was the best-selling album by a woman in that year. And I think for 11 years from when she released it, Madonna held the record of having the highest grossing documentary of all time with her Truth or Dare documentary. And then, of course, as I'd mentioned, her sex book was, or is, the best-selling and fastest-selling coffee table book in publishing history. So, and then, of course, then this was her most recent stat. This past year, back in May, she had the largest standalone concert ever for a solo artist with her celebration tour in Rio. So I think it was 1.6 million people. There have been, so just so that people don't come for me, there have been larger crowds. So I think Rod Stewart had a concert on the beaches of Rio where Madonna had it, and he had like 3-point-something million people. However, Rod Stewart's concert was for New Year's Eve. So it wasn't just a Rod Stewart concert. It was Rod Stewart and fireworks for New Year's Eve. So Madonna, people showed up. 1.6 million people showed up simply because she was there, not because they were also getting to celebrate New Year's.
And it's wild to think, too, that she had her greatest hits album come out in 1990, because at that point she had been 8 years into her career around there. And to think of all the songs and all the hits that have come after, like, 1991 to 2024, like, it's wild to think that was already her first greatest hits.
Yeah. Yeah. It's weird that, I mean, I think that was sort of what was so funny about it, that she was able to put out a greatest hits, and I mean, and she still left songs off. Like, there were songs, like, I think there were number ones that she did not include on that greatest hits, which is kind of crazy to think that, like, she would do that. But yeah, and she added, and I always loved that it was technically called a greatest hits album, and then she put 2 new songs on it. She put Justify My Love and Rescue Me, as if to say, like, yeah, I'm not done. Like, yeah, it's a greatest hits, but here's some new stuff too.
And you bring up a good point, too, with talking about streaming, because I have had this conversation with a few of my friends that it's really weird how people chart these days, because you can have, somebody come out with a song or an album. It goes number 1 the week it comes out, and then it's off the top 10 the week after. So yeah, you chart at number one, but would you really consider that a commercial success or a hit? This year, I think we're really seeing that with Sabrina Carpenter. She, her album was number one for a few weeks in a row. I'm not sure if it still is or isn't. But Espresso has been in like the top 10, like pretty much every week since April. She now has 2 more songs in the top 10. I'm really seeing that more as like an era and a hit compared to some of these other artists who their album comes out, it goes number one, next week it's off the charts.
Yeah.
And to your point too, with trying not to focus on that with Madonna, I think Britney Spears is an example too, that if you look at how her singles performed on the charts, she really never was like a chart girly. Like she's had a few number ones along the way, but like Slave for You, which might be one of her most like iconic, dances, outfits, the VMA performance, people know that. It only charted, I don't even know. It didn't make it to the top 10. It didn't do that well in the charts.
Mm-hmm.
But she's still so iconic and known for that. And I think that's a good point with Madonna. Now, I think Madonna's had a lot more number ones and a lot of hits, but kind of separating the art from the commercial success sometimes too.
Yeah. Well, and also, and we talk about this on my show all the time, media consumption's changed. How people used to consume music. I mean, in the 80s and 90s, we had to listen to the radio or watch MTV. That was it. That's how you consumed music. And it wasn't until, the internet sort of took off, and then you could sort of start to hear music online a little bit, with like Napster to like illegally download MP3s. But then once streaming started, I mean, that sort of usurped how people consumed music. And to me, it's always been the sense of community has sort of been erased, which I think sort of what hurts musicians or performers' music a little bit. When Vogue came out, we heard that for months. That song would be on the radio and on MTV every hour on the hour for months. Now, no one listens to the radio barely. I mean, I'm sure people do, but it's not one designated source where people are getting their music from. So maybe your music that you're consuming is completely different from mine, which is completely different from another friend, from another friend, from another friend, and ad nauseum, where, back in the day, everyone knew every song that was out, and that was what you listened to for months. And so, I mean, Janet Jackson, she had released Rhythm Nation and had a number one song over the course of 3 years off of the same album. That would never happen today. In fact, nowadays you get like Charlie XCX releases Brat, and then a couple weeks later you get Brat Extended, and then a couple weeks later you get Brat Remix, and then they're constantly trying to give us new, because people get bored and then they move on. We're so instantaneous gratification these days that an album comes out and within a month you've moved on to something else, and it never used to be that way. So I think the idea of fame and the level of fame has totally changed. I think people have to work really hard to make things super successful, and that you're just lucky if something goes viral. And I don't think you can plan. I mean, look at poor Katy Perry. Like, her album's tanking, and it was supposed to be this big comeback, and it's just not, and I don't know how you plan for success these days, but sorry, I've gone off the rails now. I don't know.
No, it's all valid points. Definitely. Well, shifting gears a little bit, we've covered a lot about Madonna, but can you tell us a little bit more about what she's like as a performer?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I think I loved about, other than the music. I mean, her performance, when she was at her peak, she was unmatched. Her live shows are still, to this day, I mean, the Celebration tour just wrapped up this past spring, and her shows are some of the most artful and thought-provoking and innovative shows that exist in the pop landscape today. I mean, she was singing, she was dancing, there were dancers, it was theatrical, the production of her on stage was amazing. It's, if you watch early Madonna, she was looking, there was shock value. She did unexpected things. She was doing, movements that people weren't used to seeing on live television. She was pulling stuff from the clubs as inspiration and presenting them on stage. And yeah, I mean, I think that's been one of the the hardest things as a Madonna fan is, and I mean, I think this is just life in general. Obviously, as we get older, we don't move quite as quick and as fast as we used to. And to, see her have to slow down, and I mean, anyone who's a dancer will tell you, like the way you danced when you were 22 is not the way you're going to be dancing. If you're lucky that you're dancing at all, is not how you're going to be dancing at 62. So the fact that Madonna is still even performing is a blessing. But I mean, her celebration tour, she was 64 when she was doing that tour. I mean, she was moving around for 2 hours the entire time. And I just remember I saw it a handful of times, and I would just be standing like still and maybe dancing while I'm watching the show. And my body was shattered at the end of a 2-hour show. And I would be like, how does she do this back to back, night after night? Now, I get it. She probably has every great therapy, procedure available. I'm sure she's got like a deep tissue masseuse and cryotherapy and, creams and lotions and, a plunge, an ice plunge. And she's got everything, because she's an athlete when she's on stage. But it's, you tried singing and dancing for 2 hours and see how if you're ready to do that again the next night. You know what I mean? Like it's mind boggling to think that she was able to do that, or still wants to do that. She doesn't have to. She's got more money than God. She doesn't have to do anything, but she does. And I think that's what's sort of great about her as a performer, is that she still wants to do stuff for people. I mean, she's always said she's a stage girl. She loves being on stage because of the energy and the environment. But yeah, I mean, I've always loved her as a performer. She's you want to watch her, like she's great to watch. It's funny when I've seen other people on stage and I'm like, they're really just not the same,
Well, and to your point too, how, obviously she's aging and you're not going to dance the same. I think it's interesting because there was some documentary I watched in the pandemic, and apparently people were like coming after Madonna in the Blonde Ambition tour, saying she was too old to be doing what she was doing, because she was like 32, being, sexual and stuff and dancing. And to me, I think it's a double standard between men and women. But to me, that's so surprising that in 1990, being 32 was considered being old for a woman, that you're aging out and you can't do what you're doing. And here she is 30 plus years later doing it just as good as she did then.
Yeah, it's weird. I mean, that's the weird thing. I mean, I think there was an Entertainment Weekly story when she did her Girly Show tour in 1993, and they called her grandma. Like, I was like, come on. Like, she's in her 30s and they're saying she's too old, put her out to pasture. And I'm like, and I think part of that is what motivated her to keep going, because people were like telling her to stop, and she's just like, no, I'm going to keep going. And as we should, that's as people in life, just because we get older doesn't mean we should, stop doing stuff. It's like the whole, and I'm not trying to get political. I don't want to go there, but it's like within this current election cycle where people were like, Biden, Trump, they're too old. And it's like, yeah, well, yeah, they are. But, like, how old is too old? And I think that's sort of like what Madonna keeps pushing against now is she's always sort of tackled different obstacles in her career, whether it be as a woman, as a woman with sexual desires, as a mother. And now it's like, now she's like a woman in her mid 60s, like, what does that mean? Like, you don't have a blueprint for that. And I think she's just like, well, it can, if you want to keep going and want to keep doing stuff, she does, like, there's no reason why she should stop if she's still got something to say.
I mean, from everything we've talked about, obviously I can see why she's an icon, but for anybody out there who maybe doesn't agree, or like you said, doesn't know who Madonna is, why do you think she's called the Queen of Pop?
Well, so like I said earlier, I think that a lot of people would argue, oh, she's not the Queen of Pop. Taylor Swift is, or like insert your favorite current pop star here. I think people throw that term around like queen. Oh, she's the queen. People throw that term around way too much. Like, let's be realistic here. I'm sorry, you cannot be called a queen of pop if you've just come out. Like, if you've only been on the scene for 5 years, no. no, you're maybe a princess in waiting, but like, let's look at accomplishments. Let's look at like, how long have you been around? Like, have you done iconic things that have shifted the needle in either music or entertainment at large? Like Madonna's been around for 40 plus years in the music industry. Like I think before Taylor Swift, she was the biggest solo touring artist ever. Like she's an icon. She comes from the 80s, like I mentioned, where it's like a lot of her peers are no longer here. Michael Jackson, George Michael, Whitney Houston, Prince, like they're all gone. Madonna's still around. And even some of the 80s icons that are still around aren't quite as prolific or as grand as, look at someone like Paula Abdul. Look at someone like, I just lost my train of thought. Well, Janet Jackson, but like there's certain people where it's like, Paula Abdul, she's on tour with New Kids on the Block. She only gets like a half an hour to perform. Whereas like, and they're small venues and, like I'm not saying that like size is everything, but like 1.6 million people showed up to see Madonna 40 years into her career. Like that's a pretty big deal. She's got music that spans 4 decades. It's just weird to think that people don't give her the respect that I think she's entitled to. And because she sets so many standards and so many records. And people are going to say what they're going to say, and everyone's going to worship whoever they want to worship. But I think she still should be called the Queen of Pop for sure.
I agree. Even if she's not somebody that, if she's not a singer that people stan or worship, they should definitely at least recognize her contributions and give her props for that, because she's not, she really did, pave the way for a lot of the modern day pop stars.
Well, and the reason people, I think, again, I'm not, if you're younger and you don't agree with that statement, I think it's because maybe you haven't done your research. And that's fine. If you don't want to give somebody else accolades because you like somebody else right now, fine. But I think it's, it's not an educated thing to say Madonna didn't do anything. Oh, why would we call her the Queen of Pop? Because it's like, well, look at someone like Chappell Roan, Lady Gaga, like all of those people, like what they're doing in their career. Now, I'm not saying that the talent is the same or that Madonna's talent is better. I'm just saying a lot of what they do in terms of like, if you look at like Lady Gaga's career, the blueprint for how she followed certain albums or themes or what she went after is very similar to what Madonna did. I'm not saying she's copying Madonna per se, but like, hey, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Like if it worked for Madonna, why not?
Exactly. And in addition to Madonna being called the Queen of Pop, she's also frequently referred to as a gay icon.
Yep.
So why does Madonna's music resonate so much with gay men?
So I don't know if it's necessarily just the music. I think maybe the music was the avenue with which gay men sort of saw her. Obviously her music and her music videos were sort of what draw attention to her, but she's strong. She's assertive. She's very outspoken. She knows what she wants. She's not afraid to be sexual. She's always featured beautiful men in her videos and on stage. She's fashionable. I think all of those traits sort of is what, gay men are, what resonates with gay men. She's a strong woman. She's beautiful. I remember as a high school kid, I wanted to dress exactly like her male dancers in her Vogue video. I was like, I want to wear that. Not dressed as Madonna, but as the male dancers. Like I wanted to look as sharp as they did in those suits.
Hey, I'm not opposed to wearing a cone bra every now and then. So going off of that though a little bit, years ago I read this book called Straight Jacket by Matthew Todd, and 2 years ago when I started the podcast, I did an episode on pop queens and their emotional appeal to gay men. And in that book, I cited that research for that. In the book Straight Jacket, Matthew Todd explains that pop queens typically appeal to gay men through one of 4 categories, which he kind of identified. And these include an assertion of aggressive sexuality, escape through music, empowerment / I'm too good for you, and I'm not good enough for you / victim.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you see Madonna's discography paralleling any of those themes?
And thank you for providing those in advance, because I was like, I had to give that a little bit of thought, because I was like, So, and I do feel she does sort of cover off a couple of those themes in some of her music. So an assertion of aggressive sexuality, that one's super easy. I mean, she's had music from the very beginning, like Physical Attraction, which is a killer early Madonna song. It's so good. Obviously, Justify My Love, Erotica. I mean, on her Rebel Heart album, which came out 9 years ago, there was, a song called Sex. So she's constantly sort of like in that sexuality. It's in your face. It's there. It's kind of hot, it's kind of sexy. Sometimes it's not, sometimes it is, but, yeah, so that she ticks that right there. The second one, escape through music. I mean, Madonna has hands in the air, like carefree, anthemic dance music, like her very first single, Everybody. Then there's, of course, Holiday, Into the Groove. She had that song come out, I think it was 2009, called Celebration. So there's always these sort of like carefree, on Confessions on a Dance Floor, she had Get Together. Like there's songs about just like being free because of music or because of dancing. The empowerment, I'm Too Good for You. I think the first song that came to mind, I was like, She's Not Me, off of her Hard Candy album, where she's basically saying, like, well, you might have that girlfriend, but she's not me. I'm better than her. And on her Rebel Heart album, she has Living for Love, which is all about like, you know what, I fell down, but I'm going to pick myself back up. I'm going to put my crown back on my head, and I'm going to keep on going. So, and I think a lot of her songs sort of fit in that, where it's like definitely empowerment, like express yourself, where she's talking about, don't go for second best, like it's respect yourself, basically. And the final one you said, I'm not good enough for you / victim. So I don't think I could be wrong. I didn't like deep dive on like every single song, but Madonna doesn't usually play victim in any of her music. I think the closest I could think of for that would be off of her Like a Prayer album. She has a song called Oh Father. And I think in Oh Father, the video more so than the actual content of the lyrics, which is her portraying a person who was in a abusive relationship and trying to escape that. So I think, or like in her Erotica album, she has Bad Girl, where she talks about, like, I've smoked too many cigarettes today. I'm not happy when I act this way. I think that's sort of maybe like the closest you can kind of get to that. But for the most part, she never really sort of tries to sing as if like, I'm a victim. She has Rescue Me as a song, which I always thought was a strange song for her lyrically and message wise, because that's the only song where she's ever been like, someone please come rescue me, like help me. Because I think Madonna has always been very proud of taking care of herself, and I think that's sort of been her overall message. But yeah.
Definitely. I think actually Matthew Todd, in his book, he uses Madonna as a prime example of the escape through music. And he talks about like her song Vogue and everything in that too. Is another like escape on the dance floor.
Oh, sure.
And to your point too about the I'm not good enough for you / victim, I agree. Again, I've listened to all of Madonna's albums, but I haven't listened to the deep cuts enough to know like all of those. But I don't really think anything she ever falls into like the victimhood category, because even her song Take a Bow, even though it's a sadder song, I feel it's more so kind of empowerment, where she's like saying goodbye to this person as opposed to like longing, like she knows it's not right. So,
well, she's the one closing the chapter,
Yeah.
Like, I'm like, even if it's not sort of outright said, it's like the show is over. She's the one putting that relationship to bed.
Yeah. Definitely. So she doesn't necessarily fall into that victimhood thing, but I definitely think the aggressive sexuality and escape through music probably are her top two.
Yeah.
And it's fun too, because even her songs that maybe surface level don't seem as sexual, there's a lot of like sexual innuendos within there, like Into the Groove, like, I'm tired of dancing with myself. I want to dance with someone else. What's it called? Open Your Heart, The Lock and the Key, all those things. Like there's little tongue in cheek puns there that you could take at surface level for like, oh, just a fun lyric, or take it to a deeper level of sexuality.
Right. I mean, obviously, like one of the album cuts off of Erotica, Where Life Begins. I mean, she's basically talking about getting eaten out, I mean, like... that's total aggressive sexuality,
Which then paved the way for a Chappell Roan song, Casual, where she talks about being eaten out in a car. So,
or like Sabrina Carpenter's Bed Chem.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, and I love that about Sabrina Carpenter, where she sings very sweet, but she's like, oh, she's talking dirty.
Yeah. And she's another one that has like the fun little like sexual innuendos there.
Yeah. She says it with a little cheerleader smile, but we know.
Exactly. I don't know if you've seen any of her live performances of Nonsense, but she always does some ad libs on the way out that are usually like pretty dirty.
Oh, no, I'll have to check it out.
It's funny, yeah. Well, that being said, too, you mentioned that with Madonna, obviously there's an attraction for gay men there because of her music, but you think it's more so because of some of the messaging and also some of her being an advocate for the LGBTQ plus community.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit more about her advocacy work?
I mean, she jumped on board a lot of her friends that she knew in the 80s started dying from HIV/AIDS, and she started to take that up as a cause. She did a lot of benefits, like some of her, she would do like fundraising benefits. I think there was a dance-a-thon that she did in LA. She, like one of her concerts for Blonde Ambition, the entire proceeds went to benefit HIV/AIDS research. In her Like a Prayer album, she had used part of the liner notes to be an HIV/AIDS awareness little insert, talking about, she just wanted to get the word out about it because people weren't, like people were labeling HIV/AIDS as a quote unquote gay disease. And Madonna was making sure that people knew about it and knew about safe sex, and just trying to make sure that, LGBTQ plus rights were, being talked about, like at a time when that was a career ender. If you brought it up, Madonna was very staunch and making sure that she did talk about it. And there's a lot of interviews from her, like early 90s, especially when she started diving into more sexual territory, that people would ask her about it and she would bring it up. And yeah, I mean, that's she's been a champion of gay rights ever since. I mean, she's, she worked with, people on her shows that were LGBTQ plus, and she still does. And I thought it was interesting. There's recently been going around, there's that story about Lady Gaga not correcting people when they said she could possibly be trans. And Lady Gaga says, well, I didn't want to correct people because I didn't want trans people to think I was ashamed by that. And I remember back when Madonna's, Justify My Love video came out, or when she was like cavorting around with Sandra Bernhardt, and there was rumors that she was a lesbian, and Madonna never came forward and said, I'm not a lesbian, or I am a lesbian. And she's gone on record as saying, she's like, because I don't think it's not a big deal. She's like, being a lesbian is fine. If you want to be whoever you want to be. And she didn't correct people at the, like 1991. She wasn't really like, no, because again, same thing. She didn't want people to think that she thought it was a bad thing if that's what people were thinking she was. So, kudos to her.
And wasn't there a performance in, I think, the late 2000s or early 2010s? I think it was before Obergefell v. Hodges, but there was same-sex marriage was legal in some states, and I thought she had performed, and they were during the performance, like same-sex couples were being married during the performance.
Oh yeah, at the Grammys. Yeah, I think it was the same year that I think they had just given I think gay marriage had just become legal, and I think it was that within that same month, that's when the Grammys happened. And so yeah, she performed at that ceremony where like all these gay people were in the aisle, all gay couples were getting married.
Yeah. And I mean, going to like some of the documentaries, like she showcases like her dancers who were all pretty much openly gay men.
Oh, sure. Truth or Dare.
So she's always been, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Truth or Dare. I mean, when I saw that in the theater in 1991, that was the first time I'd ever seen two men make out before. You know, like they weren't showcasing. We didn't have stuff like that on television in 1991. I mean, I think The Real World had come out in 1990, and that was the very first time they ever had like a gay man. I think, you know, Pedro was the very first gay character, or like real gay person being reflected on TV. But even that was very, like, he had a boyfriend, and they rarely showed them together. You didn't see any intimacy with them. So yeah, when the Truth or Dare documentary came out in 1991, I mean, they showed them her dancers at the Pride Parade. You showed two dancers making out. You know, like there was one of her dancers didn't like that they were flaunting their gayness, and like it was groundbreaking because no one was doing that then. And the fact that she decided to do that and to showcase that, she didn't have to, and she did, which is kind of ballsy. You know, it's kind of amazing.
Definitely. And it always felt very authentic too. Like it feels like from the get-go, she had just been embedded within the gay community, whether it's having gay dancers or her advocacy work. And none of it seemed like performative or like later in life, like she kind of kept quiet and then came up about it. Like it was always front and center with her.
For sure.
Well, shifting gears a little bit, what is your favorite Madonna era and why?
So I will say, I think whenever anybody asks me that, I'll say either erotica or bedtime stories. Erotica was just so different because that was like the album sounded like a club album. Like pop music sounded dancey before, but that album sounded like you had lifted it right from the clubs. It was just so different and gritty and dancey and fun, and then not. But also just like, that was when Madonna shifted in terms of like, not everyone loved her all of a sudden. It was very, very different. A different look, you know, like people just stopped playing her on the radio as much. It was a very different time where it's like suddenly she was this beloved artist. And then a year later, like erotica came out and you're like, why ain't they playing her on the radio now? Or, you know, like, so I mean, whenever anyone asks like era wise, I'll say erotica. However, bedtime stories, which came out in 94, would be a very close follow up, just because she was doing like pop R&B, and it was just beautiful and understated and simple, but not. And the looks that she gave us, it was kind of like trashy glam with like a heavy smoky eye and a nose ring and beautiful blonde hair. And I mean, all the videos from her Bedtime Stories album are just iconic. Like they're amazing. So yeah, I usually am torn between those two. I mean, look, don't get me wrong. I love like Ray of Light, Confessions, you know, like, I mean, there's so many. But it's like, if I cherry picked, if people were like, you have to take one of these album on a desert island with you for the rest of your life, I mean, and I'm cheating. Like I wouldn't, obviously, like I could say Immaculate Collection, but that's the greatest hits. Like if I'm thinking like studio album, I would have to say like, yeah, erotica.
Is there a specific song or album that you feel that best represents Madonna's legacy?
That one I didn't prepare for. I was like, oh, let me see what I have to say today. I'll say Ray of Light, just because I feel like that was such a surprise album for her. It was such a shift in terms of the sound of music that we were hearing at the time, and people counted her out at that point. You know, like they didn't think she had it, and she came back and did this like bizarre. It just sounded so bizarre and different than anything that we were listening to at the time. And also, she sounded sort of like grounded. You know, it was her first album as a mom, and it was like mature Madonna, but then she's still having fun. And but yeah, I'd say that the songwriting on that album is fantastic. The music, it's such a cohesive album from start. Oh, but I'm sorry. I'm also gonna say, sorry, my second runner up is Like a Prayer, because Like a Prayer is like iconic Madonna. You know, like you've got Like a Prayer, Express Yourself, Cherish. Like those are like 3 huge Madonna songs. I mean, she's got a duet with Prince on that. You know, and that album was so definitive 80s like rock pop. Again, it's a cohesive album. I would dare you to skip anything on listening to that. Like you can listen to that from start to finish, and it's beautiful and heartbreaking and wonderful and catchy. So yeah, those are my 2.
I'm laughing as you're saying that because I feel like the song Like a Prayer is one of those that also transcends time. Like you can drop it in any decade and people love it because, so my sisters are born in 97. So they're a few years younger than me. And my one sister in particular, now any pop music that's on the radio today that I listen to, she's like, oh, this is embarrassing. Nobody listens to this. I remember in 2017, she's like, no one listens to Ariana Grande. But she loves Like a Prayer for some reason. And I don't mean for some reason, like obviously it's a great song, but I wouldn't think that she would know that song because she doesn't really listen to older music. But last year we were at my cousin's wedding and they played it. And like, I mean, we were all a few drinks in, but like me and like our extended cousins, we're all like all on our knees, like praying down to her. She's like waving her drink at us like a wand as she's singing it. Like, so it just, again, it transcends times all these years later. That's still very popular.
Yeah, it's amazing the life that song has. It's, again, because I've lived it, you know, when it first came out, to me, it doesn't have like quite the impact that maybe it used to. But I mean, when I saw her perform that on the Celebration tour this past year, I would marvel at the fact that I'm like, wow, I'm like, she's got this song, like this is hers. Like she did this song. And it's kind of amazing.
Well, are there any little known facts or like fun facts about Madonna that you like to share?
I tried thinking about this. I don't know if there's anything like, I mean, I'm sure that there are things that people don't know about Madonna. Oh, well, yeah, I was going to say Madonna is her real name. I think that's something that people don't actually quite know. Like, I think they think it's like like Lady Gaga. Like, I think people think it's like that, but it's like, no, Madonna's her real name. What's another thing that is maybe she does know how to play instruments. I mean, she does play guitar, you know, that's something that she learned back in the early 80s. And then I think she sort of like got out of it and then got back to it. So yeah, she can play guitar.
Nice. Have you ever met Madonna?
Yes. So I have 2 fantastic Madonna moments. I've had a couple up close in person moments with Madonna, but the 2 that stand out the most was one back in 2015. I had she was touring for her Rebel Heart tour, and she was bringing a fan up at every show for this one number, Unapologetic Bitch. And at the Philly show, I had the esteemed honor of being that fan who got to go up and dance on stage with her. So that was probably like one of those like life altering moments where I'm like, I can't believe this is happening. And it was so quick. And I'm so happy that there's like photos and videos that exist from that moment because I can prove that it was real, you know, like otherwise it would just seem like a dream. But yeah, it was otherworldly, like to be on stage in front of 30,000 people and singing and dancing with next to holding her hand. And, you know, like it was cuckoo bananas. Like it was bonkers to just, and I will watch that video and think, how is this even possible that this happened? It's so funny. Then in 2019 for her Madame X tour, there was a part in each show where she would come off stage and sit in the audience and sort of like do a little mock interview with someone. And my friend and I had gone to one of the shows in Philly at the Met, and we dressed up in these crazy get-ups. Like it was her outfit from when she first came out in that show, sort of like a founding father. It was very like George Washington-esque. That was her outfit. So my friend and I did a DIY version of that. And I mean, they look so hokey, but it was just to get the point. And her team pulled us out of our seats and plunked us in the makeshift seats in the aisle where she would come down. And so my friend and I got to sit for 5 minutes next to Madonna, and she interviewed us and spoke to us. And that was just bizarre and ridiculous that I'm like sitting right next to her and we're talking, and she had asked me, and of course for the Madame X tour, she didn't allow us to have our phones out because she wanted it to be like an intimate experience. So all of our phones were put away. So there's no video that exists of it. I did find bootleg audio of it, which I'm not supposed to have, but I slapped it on the end of one of my episodes of my podcast just because I was like, I have to put this out there.
Yeah.
But yeah, she had asked me, what did I think of the show? And I was staring in her eyes and I totally blanked. I was like, in my head, I'm thinking, Stefan, you run a Madonna podcast. Like, you have to know, you should have something prepared. And I was like, I'm sorry, Madonna. I don't know what, I lost my train of thought. But yeah, so those are my two, like, where I interacted with her. I've had a couple other like super up close and personal moments with her, but like no physical interaction where she like speaking to me. But yeah, but I'd say those two are pretty great.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. What was she like?
I mean, she's a person, you know, like she's beautiful in person. Like, I remember looking at her face and being like, oh my God, she's just like glowing. It was bizarre to be sharing the same space and having her like, you know, after being a fan of hers for so long, to have that person then interacting with you and like putting her arm around you and holding her hand. It was bizarre. It was trippy and amazing. And then I had to come back down from Cloud 9 and like live my regular life and go to like my regular job. And I was like, this sucks. Can I go back on stage with Madonna?
It's like that pride video that surfaces every year. Like, I'm gay, move, get out of my way. It's
I
met Madonna, let me retire early.
Yeah.
Well, you did mention your Madonna podcast. So can you tell us a little bit more about MLVC?
Sure. So MLVC, I always say it's the Madonna Podcast, your place for all things Madonna, Louise, Veronica Ciccone, hence the initials MLVC. We started back in 2019. We're in our 6th year of podcasting. We do all different types of shows about her career where, you know, we'll talk about favorite performances or favorite movies. But then we also have an interview series. I mean, I've spoken to dancers, musicians, choreographers, movie directors of hers that have worked with her, you know, people from her Blind Ambition tour, from Truth or Dare. Last year, we had the 30th anniversary of her Girly Show. I reunited the cast for a Zoom. Today, I actually just put that on YouTube after like a year later, just to let everybody see it. But yeah, I mean, we've spoken to people who have worked with her, her personal trainer, you know, choreographers, directors of her movies, which has been great. You know, I mean, we've spoken to so many different people, songwriters, producers. So there's that element of the show, and then there's also an ongoing segment I call This Week in Ciccone, which is sort of like what's she been doing this week, and we sort of recap some of her stuff. Because, and the way that I look at the show, you know, a lot of people will run their podcasts honoring a person like Madonna, because there are other Madonna podcasts out there other than mine. But I sort of looked at it as, you know, she's still a living, breathing artist who's producing stuff to this day. And I didn't want to just be a legacy show where we're just sort of like looking back at her music and only talking about that. I mean, we do honor her career and her achievements, but I also, you know, when her Celebration tour started, I decided to take on the title of unofficial Celebration tour correspondent. And so I was interviewing people after I tried to do every city that she had toured. So that way we get sort of like listeners' reaction from attending the show. We covered, I think she did like 80 performances, and I think we covered 65 of them. So so it's fun. It's something that I never envisioned doing quite this long. And I don't have any plans to stop. I'm already talking about, season 7 next year, you know, and because I kind of feel like, well, why stop now? You know, like I've been going as long as I have. I in my head, I sit there and say season 10 has a nice finality to it, you know, but I'll see what's happening in 3 more years. Like if she's still going and coming out with stuff, I can't imagine like me stopping the show and then her doing something like a brand new album and like me not wanting to talk about it. So who knows? I mean, I'll say I'll wrap up in season 10, but who knows?
Maybe season 10 will only be like the first greatest hits of the podcast, and you'll have like a whole nother 30-year career.
I mean, look, I'd love for her team to bring me on as like part of their PR, but I do say also at the same time, I'm like, well, them hiring me, then I'd have to play by their rules, and I'm like, I kind of think it's fun to sort of like do the show on my own, and like I can do whatever I want, but I would love to have her on. But at the same time, I don't need to have her on to sort of make the show what it is. I've been doing it for 6 years without her. She's there. She's the through line through everything. But yeah.
Well, put it out in the universe. Madonna, if you're listening out there, reach out to Stefan.
Always. I've tried. Trust me, I've tried to get her on the show many, many, many times, but it hasn't happened yet. So
maybe in the future, though.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
Awesome. Well, as we're coming to the end of this episode, for anyone who's never listened to Madonna before, maybe they're like a virgin when it comes to her music, where would you recommend they start at and why?
So, I mean, I would say if you're going to listen to an artist, to be fair, like start from the beginning and just, go chronologically from album to album to album. However, if you're lazy or you don't have time, I would say Cliff Notes version would be Immaculate Collection. Like that's sort of like a really great baseline to start. It's like a perfect Madonna starter kit because you've got, all of the big hits that sort of made her what she is today. And then you can go from there and sort of like pick and choose because she's got, I always say songs, certain Madonna albums I listen to depending on the type of mood that I'm in. And some people like classic Madonna from the 80s. Some people like newer Madonna. I think it just depends on what type of music you're into and what you like to listen to. I would say though, if you'd like a really great, like to see like Madonna performing, watch the Blind Ambition tour because Blind Ambition tour or Truth or Dare, like you can watch like the HBO version of the Blind Ambition tour, which is just the performance, and then Truth or Dare, which is great because you sort of get a little bit of who she is as well as these like beautifully filmed performances. So yeah, I think that's a good place to start.
And connecting it back to the tarot, again, the Emperor in reverse is indicating that we need to make sure we're connecting our personal power to our ability to take action. And the Emperor is viewed as a leader, someone who should feel empowered to break free of typical confines and structure to take action that feels in alignment with their goals. And I think through discussing Madonna's career, we can definitely see the parallels there. She's someone who has always owned autonomy over her body and owned her own sexuality in a male-dominated industry, even when others told her not to. She's constantly reinvented herself through different eras. She's faced controversy and pushed the envelope, but always remained an advocate and got her message across. And regardless of whether she's your queen or not, I think we can all agree that she's definitely made major contributions to the pop girlies we see today, and she's paved the way for them. And that is why she is referred to as the Queen of Pop. And, the Queen, that's another court title. That's somebody else who's a leader, who's not afraid to pave their way and their legacy. Madonna is somebody who's definitely broken free of typical confines and structures and took that action to move her career forward, even if it wasn't considered quote unquote popular at the time, such as supporting gay men and raising awareness around AIDS. And along the way, she provided a musical outlet that let her gay fans escape through the music and feel free. So maybe after listening to this, vogue a little bit, hit the dance floor, let that energy flow to feel free and lose yourself in the music. But also more importantly, use those themes of empowerment within her music to really chart your own course. If something's not feeling right to you and you're ready to make a move, now is the time to do it. Really look within to see what you want and need, and then find ways to take action to move forward on your journey, even if that means breaking free of the traditional structure of what you thought was right for you or what others placed upon you. Maybe it's time to do away with the status quo. Maybe it's time to take a different path on your journey forward. And remember, the Emperor is viewed as an authority figure who has the courage to lead and move forward. And we should have the courage to move our own lives forward in the direction we want them to go in. Well, Stefan, thank you so much for joining. This has been really fun to talk about. I've known about Madonna's music and stuff, but I've learned so much here. I think when we wrap up, I'm going to go downstairs, go on YouTube and just like watch all her music videos today.
That sounds like a great plan.
It's a perfect day for it. It's a little cloudy and overcast. I'll just, get some, an iced coffee, watch some Madonna.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds like a good Sunday. Mm-hmm. But before I do that, can you please tell the listeners where they can learn more about you, your podcast, your photography, all that fun stuff?
Sure. So podcast, we're on Instagram, X, Threads at MLVC Podcast. The podcast is also on YouTube. So if you'd like to watch your podcasts as opposed to just listen, we're on YouTube at MLVC Podcast as well.
And after you're done listening here, definitely check out the MLVC podcast. Again, that is the Madonna Podcast. And for a Jaded Gay, you know the drill. Please remember to rate, review, and subscribe. You could send any questions or feedback to me, rob@ajadedgay.com. Also, for more information on this topic, episode resources, blog posts, links to merchandise, socials, all that fun stuff, you can visit the website, ajadedgay.com. You can connect with the podcast on Instagram, TikTok, SoundCloud, and YouTube at A Jaded Gay Pod. You can follow me personally, Rob Loveless, on Instagram at Rob_Loveless. Also, if you're feeling generous, consider supporting the podcast on Patreon for as little as $1 a month. That gets you instant access to episodes ad-free a day early, plus exclusive monthly bonus content. Or if you're just interested in those bonus episodes, you could pay $3 per bonus episode just to access them. But truthfully, I think subscribing for $1 a month is a better deal. But hey, do what's right for you. Or if you're scared of commitment, don't worry, I get it. You can make a one-time donation on Buy Me a Coffee for any dollar amount. And both of those are at A Jaded Gay Pod. And remember, every day is all we have, so you got to make your own happiness. Bye.